His eyes got really wide with like frustration and anger. And all of a sudden, he just like clenched his teeth really tight. And it was sudden, and he stopped. And I looked at him and I said, in my head, I'm thinking, what just happened? But I said, what do you want to say? So I knew something had happened, and he was, clenching down.
Welcome to the Different Kind of Psychiatry podcast, brought to you by the ACO. I'm Dr. Chris Burritt. Each month, we feature a narrated article, case presentation, or interview or discussion with one or more of our doctors who practice a different kind of psychiatry. We're interested in your questions and comments, and I would love to hear your feedback. Send an email to aco@orgonomy.org. The best way to help the American College of Ergonomy spread its knowledge is by letting others know about us. If you enjoy the podcast, we'd appreciate you leaving a rating and review. If you're interested in attending one of our webinar presentations, you can meet the doctors and join in on the discussion afterwards. If you're interested in training with the ACO, you can learn more about the medical orgone therapy and social ergonomy training programs. You can connect with us and learn more at orgonomy.org. This episode features the audio from the webinar Suicide Prevention, Relationships Matter, presented by Dr. Susan Marcel. Listen in to hear about her patient, Mr. B, who was in crisis with severe pain, anxiety, intense sadness, and suicidal ideation. Hear how he was able to weather the storm through his trust and his emotional connection with Dr. Marcel in therapy. I'm Dr. Chris Burritt. Thank you for joining us for the ACO's A Different Kind of Psychiatry case presentation webinar. We're glad to have you. I'm happy to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Susan Marcel, who will be presenting Suicide Prevention, Relationships Matter.
Hi, Dr. Burritt.
Welcome, Dr. Marcel. Dr. Marcel is board certified by the American College of Osteopathic Family Physicians, as well as by the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology. She's a clinical associate of the American College of Ergonomy, and she's in private practice in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. She has published numerous articles in the Journal of Ergonomy. Now, so the audience knows at any time during the presentation, you can type questions into the Q&A, and we'll get to those at the end. So, Dr. Marcel, how did you decide to present this topic today?
Well, this has been a topic that's been on my mind in my work for many years. And last year I had a very acute situation with a patient who became suicidal, and it was a very dramatic story. And I thought if I shared it, maybe it might help somebody else show how this gentleman got through it, with our relationship in therapy.
I see. So maybe you can give us some background. Who is this gentleman?
His name's Mr. B, and he's an attractive man, 62 years old, medium build, very clear eyes, but his eyes sometimes have a sad quality to them. He's married. He has a son. He has a very deep voice, and he's got this charming half smile that he does, when he first greets me and through the sessions. And he looks a lot younger than, his age. When he smiles with that side of his mouth, and he tilts his head sometime, it has a very seductive but endearing quality. It draws you right in. When he walks into my office, he tilts his head and he says, "Hey, Doc, how you doing?" And he immediately takes control of the room, and that's his style. He's got to be in control. And he works in the music production industry, and he sings pretty well. And he comes off, though, as this kind of cool, a little bit cocky, tough, I'm in control, I got this kind of a guy. Got a lot of energy, but sometimes he has suffered from depression over the years that I've known him, and anxiety. So when he called me at the end of last summer, he called me saying he wanted to kill himself. It was out of the blue, and I knew something really important and big. He was somehow breaking down. All his coping mechanisms weren't working.
So when he called you, it wasn't something that you were expecting because he was becoming more depressed or something was happening?
Not at all.
Wow.
Not at all. Mm-mm.
So maybe you could tell us about that phone call.
Right. So it was a really hot summer, end of sun. It was like August, beginning of September, Tuesday morning. I'm just getting ready for work, and my phone rings, and he's on the other end, and he's crying, just sobbing, deep distress. He's like, "Hey, doc, I had to call you," and he rarely calls me, so that it was really unusual. And he said he's crying constantly. He can't stop. His belly was hurting, and his groin was hurting, and he said something is up. And he said, I'm just so sad. I can't stop crying. I don't have any reason to cry, but I'm afraid I'm going to kill myself. And I need to go to the hospital. This is really bad. So it was very, very different from when I had just seen him 2 weeks prior. So I kept him on the phone, and he described that he went to the family doctor. He went to, the family doctor thought he might have had a muscle strain. But the doctor wanted more testing. And then he had a trip to the emergency room because the pain got really bad. He was having belly pain and groin pain. And in the ER, he was diagnosed with acute prostatitis, cystitis, and then possible kidney stones. And he was sent home just on antibiotics, but no pain meds. And he described his care with the family doctor in the ER is it was very adequate medically, but it was mechanical. And no one was picking up how distressed this gentleman was, and how much misery he was really in. So he's describing this to me, and he's sobbing. And this is a guy that keeps it wrapped up in control. So for him to be sobbing like that was really different. And he's like, "This is deep. Something very deep inside of me is going on. I'm so sad. I can't take it. I want to die, but I couldn't do that to my son." He said he had nausea and dry heaves. And he said he's been walking around the neighborhood that day, just early that morning, just to get some relief, because when he's home, he would cry so much. So he'd go out, feel better, come back and start crying. And he said to me, quote, "I want to blow my brains out." So it was, I was stunned, just stunned. And I had worked with Mr. B for 27 years. So I knew this gentleman very well. Really let me build up trust with him. And as he battled depression, or he would have episodes of depression and anxiety over the years. And he did have previous episode of suicidal thinking and suicidal ideation, but he didn't act on it. He didn't have a plan. I knew he had been physically abused as a child, and there was neglect in his childhood. And he also witnessed his own mother's suicide attempt when he was very young. So there's a lot to this gentleman. And he was a lively young child that, his parents probably couldn't tolerate. He's very high energy. And like his characteristic traits of being this kind of charming, cocky, I got this, mentality, it just wasn't there. But that's what he was using through his life to get through. Sometimes he would lay on the treatment couch in my office, and he would get very, very sad and frightened, but not to this degree. And sometimes he would tremble with fear. But on the phone, he seemed to be breaking down, and all of this was just coming up. There was no cool, charming facade. So I just said to him on the phone, "Mr. B, tell me." And there was this moment of silence. And, my heart was pounding.
Yeah. So he was telling you all about his pain and the feeling like he was not being heard in terms of his emotional distress with the other doctors. And so how did you handle it? What did you do for him?
Yeah, well, I was silent. I said, "Just tell me." And he knew that I would listen. And he sighed. He had this big sigh on the phone. And he was starting to describe these long ago memories, some of which we had touched on in the past. But his cat had died a couple months prior to him calling me that day. And he was saying how sad he was. He was really attached to this cat, and pets are people's lifelines sometimes. And this cat meant a lot to him. And I knew this end of August, beginning of September in the past, it was a very vulnerable time for him, because over the years that I've known him, that window of time, he would often have shifts in his mood, and he'd get in obsessive thinking and flashbacks to the physical abuse from his father. And he also felt this was coming up, like this confusion about his parents' arguments. Like they would argue verbally. Sometimes there were physical altercations, and he was just standing by, helpless. He froze. He literally froze with fear when his parents would fight, and he would hide in a corner. He'd cover his genitals with his hands, and like he was crouching down. And he loved his parents dearly, but he was furious, especially with his dad, for the way he was treating his mom. And he's telling me all of this, and I knew some of it on a more superficial level, but not to this depth. And what we saying how alone he felt when he was a kid, except he had an uncle who was very, very sweet to him and would visit him once in a while, and it took him horseback riding. And yeah. So he had he had somebody that was there for him, that saw him and he could connect with. So, and interestingly, over the past 3 years, Mr. B has been taking horseback riding lessons nearby. So, and he thoroughly enjoys it. And I think, please get on the horse. That's a good thing,
Yeah. Dr. Marcel, it sounded like when he called you, there was this sudden like connection with a lot of depth that for whatever reason didn't come up before, and he needed to express it and tell you and tell you and tell you. And I don't know if this is correct, but that sigh, almost like, is it okay if I just keep telling you? I have so much to say and express.
Exactly. It was like a tsunami. I was stunned because he was always in control, and now he was not. And this was, it was just all of this emotion. And the memories literally were physically, emotionally, and mentally just flooding all over him. Wow. And all of his usual ways of coping with it just weren't working. So by the end of that phone call, he said he felt better. So it was about 40 minutes long, that phone call. And he agreed to come in to see me that next day. And I was a little nervous about that, like, should I see him that day? And he said he felt better. He was going to go for a walk. And he started to tell me about a new kitten that he had just adopted. And
in the next appointment?
No. This was on the phone call.
Still on the phone call.
Yeah, on the phone call. He started telling me about his new kitten. I'm like, great, and all this kindness came up. So, there's so much to this gentleman. And I asked him, I said, if things start feeling really bad again, would you call me? And he agreed, if we have a safety plan, like anytime my patients, I often ask them, if that comes up, what would you do to keep yourself safe? And would you call me? And he agreed to call. And I trusted him that he would do that. Wow. We had a doctor-patient relationship that was, full of emotional contact and trust. And it gave Mr. B a stability and a way to express himself. So I knew that he'd be okay. I felt that I could trust him and be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then what happened when he came into the office?
Yeah. So the next day, I hang up the phone and I'm, going, oh my gosh, how do I go forward? And, it really threw me, but,
he may have slept better than you that night.
I think so. But he came in early that morning, the next morning. And he arrived earlier than his appointment time. Usually he's there right on time, but he came early and he looked pretty sad. And he had dark circles under his eyes, and his shoulders were hunched down, and he looked disheveled, like he wasn't shaven, and just with a jacket on.
It sounded like he couldn't focus on anything else other than all these deep feelings and thoughts that came up. Shaving, brushing his teeth, that was secondary.
Yeah, exactly. And that often happens with depression, where people just don't take care of themselves, and getting a shower, or brushing their teeth, or just changing or shaving or whatever. So I knew that he was really in a bad way, because I'd never seen him like that ever. But he again, in the waiting room, I went out to greet him. He sighed and he slowly walked down the hall. There was no half smile. There was no in control Mr. B. He sat down in the chair and he just looked up at me and he said, "I feel better, Doc." And all I said was, "Tell me, just tell me." So he just made eye contact with me, and with very, very sad eyes, he said, "This morning, the first thing I thought of when I woke up was I wanted to kill myself. And I'm just so sad over my cat. And I slept well last night, but I don't have an appetite. he said he walked for an hour the day before when he had called me. And that helps his mood and anxiety. He said he's lost some weight, but he said, I don't want to go back to the hospital. I just want to feel better. So again, there's that, like, I want to die, but I want to feel better. So often there's that ambivalence when people become depressed and suicidal, that they're in that war with two parts of themselves.
Yeah.
So he told me about upcoming doctor's appointments and some testing for the abdominal pain. And he was in a lot of pain. You could tell he was just really struggling with physical pain.
Were these medical conditions something that had been brewing or going on, or this was new? How did it come about?
The kidney stones, he had a previous episode of a kidney stone a couple of years ago, but the prostatitis and the cystitis, that was new. And on top of that was all the emotional stuff. So I think the physical and the emotional and the kidney stones, it just added to the tsunami of the emotions that he was going through.
He's having inflammation of his prostate, inflammation of his bladder, and in severe pain.
Correct.
Did you have a sense at that point if that physical medical condition erupted and brought up feelings, or his feelings had an effect on his bladder and prostate, or do you have a sense?
They're definitely connected. Which came first? I know this window of time, every year he would get moody and sad and depressed. So, but I had no inkling of that earlier in the summer last year, but it kind of hit all of a sudden, precipitated by the cat dying. So I think emotional stuff started first based on his history. Then the physical stuff cropped up. And either way, each of those things, the emotional and the physical, needed to be addressed. He needed, good medical care, and he also needed to be able to express all this emotion.
Yeah.
So when he said, I just want to feel better, I felt a sense of relief. Like, okay, he was here. He showed up early. He's on time. He came early.
He was there because he wanted to be alive, it sounded like.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So he's telling me again about these doctor's appointments and his pain. And he sat quietly for a moment in the chair, and he teared up, and there was this long pause, and I was sitting there with him, and there was this deeper emotional contact. I felt myself, I could feel him in the room, and I started tearing up a little bit. And he looked up at me and with gratitude and that little half smile, and he said, what is all this? Like he was observing, he's in it, but he's watching himself. Like, what is all this? And I just looked at him and I said, it's what you feel, just stay with what you feel. And he sighed again. And he said, I'm nauseous. I'm scared. This feels really old. And he was afraid that his new kitten was going to die, especially the kitten was jumping all around, and he was afraid that this cat was going to get hurt. But he said, I don't want to die. I just want to feel better. I can't stay like this. It's been years of this pain. And he's holding his belly and his groin. And he said that, and then there was another pause between us. And it just kind of hung there and lingered as he was, the feelings were coming up. He was trembling with fear. And again, the tears just quietly falling down his cheeks. And at that point, I was wondering what to do, and I'm sitting there quietly, but what if this gets worse? So we talked about hospitalization, if the suicidal thinking got stronger and more intentional. And we talked about his medication that he was on, and he's takes some vitamins and probiotics. So we adjusted some of that. And, meds can be a safety net or Band-Aid. And he knew I took him seriously and would listen. And he knew he could call me. So as we discussed all that, went back and forth, he said he felt he could be okay for the rest of the day. And we scheduled a phone call for the following day. And I said, and then an in-person patient meeting, where we would meet in person several days after. And, but that he could call me anytime, and that he had to get the medical testing done so we could know what this was and treat it properly. Yeah. And at the end of the session, his nausea went down. He's like, I'm not nauseous anymore. And he left the session very calm. He was standing up a little straighter and much less distraught. So, um, I felt like the session went well, and he had a plan. He had a safety plan. And I should say his wife and his son were also involved in this discussion, um, and they were helping him be safe, and they understood what was going on. So they were a kind of an anchor for him in a way to
Yeah.
help him,
Yeah.
get through this.
You talked about his nausea on the phone and then in the session. Do you think that was related to his feelings? I know sometimes people can feel nauseous when they're unable to express something,
Yeah,
sadness and crying often, but
correct. Yeah, when he's able to vent either his deep sadness and crying or anger throughout this whole week or two, the nausea went down when the emotions were expressed. It's almost like something's in there that has to come up and come out, and that definitely helped. So I knew the more I could talk with him, either on the phone or in person, I could help him get through whatever this was. You
yeah.
know,
And you mentioned his psychiatric medicine and vitamins, and the way I look at the medicine is dampening down feeling essentially. And so it sounded like, I don't know if it was a tightrope, but some balance that you were looking for of he needs to express this. He's at a deeper level. What can he tolerate? What's too much? And it sounded like that's what you were trying to gauge when you saw him in the office.
right? Exactly, exactly. Yeah. And I knew he'd call me, if it wasn't working, because sometimes psychiatric meds can make you more nauseous. I didn't want that, but I also didn't want to miss an opportunity to give him a safety net. So I knew he would call. And we talked about that, and I knew he would call me uh, if it wasn't working, because he knew his body well enough, and he had been on medication on and off throughout his life. So, um, he knew how to gauge what he was going through, and be able to tell me what he needed. And I trusted that. So,
Yeah. And how did things develop from there?
yeah. So the next day, so this is day 3 since he called me, on day 3, he called me again and said, I feel better. The nausea was way down. He said, I'm still sad over my cat. The walking has helped, but it really does help me feel better. He was able to eat something, and that felt good he wasn't eating for a couple of days. And he said to me, I don't want to die. I don't want to die. I was relieved when he said that. So we agreed to meet in person 4 days later. And he again agreed to call me if he, felt like something was shifting, if he was feeling worse, or if he was feeling suicidal.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And did anything come up in that 4-day period between appointments?
No, but he was always on the back of my mind.
Yeah, maybe you could share some of that for, what effect did this all have on you?
Yeah. It was very serious. This is a gentleman I've known for years, and I was very fond of. I knew his strengths, I knew his weaknesses, and we had a very good relationship. And, the thought of him dying, for his family, for me, for himself, the life he leads, all his friends, it would be devastating. It would have been a real tragedy. And so all that was kind of brewing in the back of my mind while this was going on. So those next few days, but I trusted that he would call me. So I knew if I didn't hear anything, it's probably okay. But I was anxious.
Yeah.
Like anybody would be. So
Dr. Marcel, if I could just interrupt.
yeah,
I mean, what stands out is a big part of your role was to stand how much intensity he brought to his sessions, to the phone calls. And even though it brought up a lot of strong feelings in you, to kind of ride those waves and kind of share the boat with him as he's going along. Not hospitalize him out of a fear and potentially not have him have the outlet of therapy with you, but also be cautious and be aware that there is a possibility that it could worsen,
yeah. One of the metaphors I often use with my patients is I love to sail, and I have a sailboat model statue in my one office, and I sometimes feel like the mast of the sailboat, and the wind is just blowing on a patient, and I'm there like kind of with them holding up the sails, and that I'm teaching them that there's something called tacking. When you sail into the wind against the current, but you can still get upstream, but you have to change how you approach the wind and the water. And so I teach my patients about, like, okay, how can we tack better? What do you need to change? How do you go through what you're going through with all this? So with him, I can't say I thought of it at the time, but as I've understood his treatment and his personality, all of this wind was blowing in his face, all this emotion and memories from his childhood, the cat dying. He had to learn how to adjust so he could just get through the next hour or the next day. And I was part of that. So I was there, helping him with the mask, holding it up and adjusting. And the walking really helped him going out there, changed, and him being able to cry. And the nausea would go down, and the physical pain still was there, but it was lessening as because he was on antibiotics too. I think that helped. And then the therapy, the treatment with me definitely helped his emotional and physical state. So
next,
he comes in 4 days later. This is now day 7 after he had first called me, and he came early to the appointment, and he's in my waiting room, and he's pacing and he's agitated, and it was very different than before. And he sounded irritated, and he sat down in the chair, and he just said to me, "I can't lay on the treatment couch today." And he's like yelling loudly, "I'm too upset. I don't want to feel like this. My mood, up and down, up and down." I just get flooded with all these thoughts and memories. And it was very different. So I'm like, okay, hang on. I've got to adjust the sail somehow. And all these memories from his childhood, again, were flooding up. And he said, "My childhood was terrible." And he immediately stood up, and he's pacing back and forth, the length of my office. And there's other practitioners in my suite, and he's yelling. So, it was really dramatic. And his eyes got really wide with like frustration and anger. And all of a sudden, he just like clenched his teeth really tight. And it was sudden, and he stopped. And I looked at him, and I said, in my head, I'm thinking, what just happened? But I said, "What do you want to say?" So I knew something had happened, and he was, clenching down against it. So again, he starts yelling and screaming. He's like, "I could never kill myself. My son would be absolutely devastated. It would hurt my wife. I couldn't do that to them. But it hurts so bad." And again, he's leaning over, he's holding his belly, and his eyes shut tight, and almost looked like another wave of emotion was going through his body. And it flooded him, and he kept pacing back and forth. And then all of a sudden, he just stopped in the middle of the office. And it was like he was checking in. Something was happening that he was observing. And I said, "What just happened? What just happened?" And again, he sighs, and he said, "I was looking on the internet," and his voice is still loud, but a little softer than a few moments ago. And he said, "Interstitial cystitis. That's what I have. All my symptoms fit that. I get these spasms and in pain. And then when I get the pain, then all these emotions come flooding over me, and my obsessive thinking." And I said, "I just can't stop it. And then I want to die." And he looked directly at me, and I just nodded, and he took a breath. I took a breath, and he just paced, and he said, "It's too much. I can't take this. It's just too much." And I said, "Yeah." I just agreed with him. But he sighed again, and he looked exhausted, but it looked like the pacing, the yelling, the clenched jaw. I mean, something let go. And he actually looked in his face. He looked relieved. It's like the pacing and the yelling had discharged all that frustration, the pain, the physical pain, the emotional pain.
It sounded like he needed to say he wanted to die, even though there's a part of him that absolutely did not want to die. But just to be able to say that.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And he knew I wasn't judging him, that I wasn't going to knee-jerk react. I was there to really just try to understand and go to the depth with him.
Yeah.
And so he he said to me at the end of the session, could he come back the next day to meet? And I said, absolutely. you know,
It keeps sounding like he keeps saying, is this too much? Can I do more? Are you tired of me? Can I keep telling you? Can I keep expressing? That's what I keep feeling every time he has those little moments.
yeah, I don't know that he was doing that consciously, but he needed more contact. He needed more venting.
Yeah.
Yeah. He needed more of that connection. And I knew he trusted that because over the years, we've talked about, what's it like having a therapist, long-term like this that you could go to when you're really struggling. And then even in the good times, what's that like? So we scheduled the appointment for the next afternoon. So that would have been the third in-person session over 8 days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And maybe you could say something about it, but I would imagine your schedule, your life is a little bit being rearranged to help take care of this guy, and that stands out.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of other patients and, caring for them as well. But when there's an emergency, you figure it out, you make do, you get the help and get the hours in, so I'm busy, but I was able to accommodate him and I, of course I would do that. And he knew, and that he could ask me, that he wasn't going to take it on and be in control. He was literally reaching out so he could depend on me. And I saw that as a positive.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds very far from, I got this, I'm in control, I take care of myself.
Correct.
Yeah.
So he comes in the next day, and he walked into the office much more confident, and the smile was back. He has this cute half smile, and, I'm like, okay, he's back. And he said he felt better. So, he said he walked that night and he walked for over an hour and then he slept solid for 8 hours. And what I should say is too, his sleep had been kind of off prior to this event all happening. And then during those first 7 days, so that the night before he had a really good night's sleep. And he said, I feel this anxiety in my groin. So literally he has this emotional feeling that's turning into like a quivering and then the pain and the spasm in his groin. And it was more on the left side at this point. And then he said something like out of the blue, he just said, I remember my aunt and my uncle, the uncle that took him horseback riding. And he said, they were safe havens for me. And he also recalled a memory of when his dad left him alone in the backseat of his car, the family car, when he was 5 years old. And while he was sitting in the backseat of the car, he says he saw a woman walk by, and he said to him, it looked like a witch, and he was terrified. And the woman was laughing at him. And he said, did I really see that? Was it a vision? Was it real? He said he doesn't know, but he felt terrified, very, very scared. And he said, this all makes sense somehow. Like he was putting pieces of this puzzle together with all the memories of the abuse, remembering, his aunt and uncle and the horseback riding and this lady. And he got out of the car, he ran down the street crying, hysterical. And he ran into his home, and his mom was there, and his mom knelt down and consoled him and hugged him. And so, he was remembering his aunt and uncle and then his mom. And, he as he's relaying the story to me, he started crying, his eyes got very moist, and he was remembering his mom very sweetly. And he said, I put this facade of being, cool and in control all the time, but deep down, I'm so sad and so lonely. Mm. And I just leaned in and I said, tell me. At this point, there's this long moment of quiet, and he's sobbing. And he said, when I was age 6 or 7, he watched his mother take a bottle of pills in an overdose attempt.
Oh my God.
Suicide. Yeah. And she took the bottle, the pills, and he knew something was up. And she, after a while, she passed out on the floor, and he tried to wake her up, and she wouldn't wake up. So he runs out the door, runs down the street to a neighbor's house to get help. And he said, I saw her lying there. I was so little. I was so afraid. And there was this moment between us when he's telling me the story, and his eyes just looked really deeply at me, really deeply. And, he exhaled again, and he was collecting himself. And again, it felt like something, him relaying. I had known about the suicide attempt by the mother in the past, but I didn't know all the details and how badly he felt about it. Of course, he would have felt badly. He was a very sensitive boy. But for him to feel it and show it with the sobbing and the crying, and, and clearly him telling me that, there was, again, this relief that I could see in his face, and the way he held his body, his shoulders, his breathing. And so we were coming to the end of the session, and, we planned to meet again the next appointment, and that he would call me if he didn't feel safe, or he could call me sooner, and I would happily see him again, because I really wanted to keep him out of the hospital if possible. Yeah. So it was a key moment in Mr. B's treatment. He had this cool facade. He lost it, and he was able to see it back up again, and then how it hid this very deep loneliness that was prevalent in him, and how he's had it since he was a little kid.
Was he aware of it before? Had that come up in his therapy? The fact that him being aware that this is what's happening, this is what I do?
That's a great question. I would say yes, he was aware of it, but not at this depth. Mm-hmm. So that's the difference. That what he was going through, over the past 8 days, it took him much deeper than he was ever used to, and yet he was able to just stand it, because I could stand it, and just get through it and feel heard.
You reassured him that he could stay there. He could stay with it.
Yeah. Yeah. That he didn't have to run to be this in control. He could let himself be out of control a little bit. And that's what it felt like a bit. And almost like he was handing the reins to me, like, you take over, Chuck, But it was a key moment, in his treatment during that session, with the eye contact and him being able to admit how little he was and how afraid he was. And I mean, I can't imagine what that must have been like for him as a little boy, No,
my daughter's that age. I couldn't imagine.
Right. So
I almost wonder if he, started developing that part of his facade and part of his character at that age, and that really intensified it and solidified it, through that moment.
Sure. Yeah. Sure. He had nobody else. I mean, he witnessed his mom's suicide attempt. There was nobody else at home. He was alone with her. He had to take control, and he knew that the neighbors might be able to help. So I think that's a testament to the health in him, that he had to develop that I'm in control. I got to do something. He didn't just hide or withdraw, or, he really went and got help. And the mom survived. She went to the hospital and she did okay. But
his life.
But, the scars that he has had because of that, it's lifelong,
Yeah.
So anyway, let's see, a week later, we had our next session. So this is 15 days after he called. At that session, he seemed much more kind of put back together, if you will. Mm-hmm. And we went over his medical tests. He had some x-rays and some testing by the urologist, and he did have kidney stones. And the urologist said they probably would pass. He was able to lie down on the treatment couch, and he seemed much less anxious and less sad. And the suicidal thinking was gone. And he had a memory of his parents hitting him. And he said sometimes they would smack him across the mouth, or they'd smack him on his back or his behind. And he was scared. He had nobody to tell, nobody to vent to, or say how he felt. And then he remembered a friend of his from childhood, who he still was in touch with, who was also abused by his parents, by the friend's parents, that friend was not doing well. And that friend was not in treatment for his depression. And it seemed like Mr. B was comparing himself to his friend. And he said, I'm doing better, but he's not doing well. And he was concerned for his friend. So again, this moment of silence happened. And I just looked at him and I just felt like I just, something came to me that I wanted to say after a couple of moments. I just said, you know what, Mr. B, you are a miracle. You know that? And he looked at me, that head tilt and the half smile and the curious eyes. I said, when you come into your sessions, you let yourself express that deeper, dark, emotional stuff that most people can't face. You were a lively child and you're very sensitive. And I said, you lived through hell in your childhood, and yet you raised your son so much better than you were raised. And, you and your wife didn't pass down any of the craziness, and the sickness didn't go to the next generation, to your son. And you don't want to hurt your son. I said, you support him, you care about him, and you care about the effect you have on him. You spent your life fighting for the life inside of you and your family. And he just took that in. And, our session was coming to the close, and he got up and, we made our next appointment, and I knew that like the acute crisis had subsided. Mm-hmm. And he walked over to the door, and, the hand on the doorknob comment.
Yeah.
Some patients do. It's usually a very important comment.
Yeah.
He put his hand on the doorknob and he says to the door, he's like, I think I'm going to go to the horse stable tomorrow and ride my horse. And I'm thinking, yes, go, because he always feels better when he does that. Then he glances over his shoulder looking at me, and he smiles this, again, that half smile, very sweet. He looked directly at me and he said, you know what, Doc, you're like a mother to me. I love you. And I said, I love you too. See you next week. And it was just this sweet moment of joy and love that, all that fear and loneliness. And yet he was able to express the sweet love and in the sessions. And he knew I got him. He knew I really cared. Like I was in the room. It was very sweet.
Yeah. That also sounds like it came from a deeper place. I'm sure he's said he appreciated you and thanked you before, but this sounded like from a deeper level from him.
Yeah, his usual thank you was, hey, Doc, thanks a lot. Like this cool, but this was different. This was very much from the heart, way deep down, because all this stuff would come up and had been, let go. He wasn't holding it in. The pain was gone. Physically, he was feeling better. Mentally, much better. The crying helped. And underneath all of that tough guy and all the loneliness, underneath was love. Right in his core was love. And he was able to express that.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
What a beautiful moment, and a way to end 15 days or 2 weeks of very challenging, intense.
Yeah. 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 It was very challenging for him, for me. So, he's a pretty amazing man. And again, that's why I wanted to tell his story, because there's maybe someone else that might be hurting that might want to reach out and get help, because, we all have layers, that we all put our facade on. We have this outer layer that we meet the world with.
Yes.
And then we have a second layer that's where all our bruises and our scars and wounds are, and then deeper down is that core where his love was, but it couldn't come out because of all the pain and the secondary layer and that cool facade, this character. But in telling me he loved me, there was something deeper coming through, and he's doing a lot better right now. I mean, I've seen him pretty regularly since that happened last summer, and he's doing very well.
Oh, very good.
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So if I could take a moment, I wanted to make some comments that as I was preparing for this, some statistics that I learned that were very disturbing to me.
Sure.
Suicide's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And most people think the winter holidays are when most suicides occur. And one of the reasons I wanted to do this in April was April is the month where the most suicides occur in the United States. I didn't know that. I mean, all my years of training, I'd never known that statistic. And the CDC reported on their website that in 2022, one person dies by suicide every 11 minutes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, think about that. I was staggering. And, how do we change this? And the suicide rate has actually gone up a bit.
4 people since we started this webinar.
I'm sorry? Yeah.
It's 4 people since we started this webinar.
Correct.
Hmm.
So, and it's gone up. The rate's gone up, but the latest statistics on the CDC website was from 2022. So 3 years have gone by, pandemic, post-pandemic, the numbers are higher. I don't have the exact numbers, but that's very serious. So, I wanted to mention to you too, and to our audience, that there's a gentleman named Kevin Hines, who is a mental health advocate, who I met a couple years ago. He produced a movie called Suicide, The Ripple Effect. He himself had a psychotic episode, and he jumped off the Golden Gate Bridge and crashed into the water, fracturing his back, his legs, his sacrum, one of his arms. I mean, he lived to talk about it. And there were witnesses. The Coast Guard got him right out of the water. He got to the emergency room right away, and he was psychotic. But and this movie, the Ripple Effect, Suicide, The Ripple Effect, he advocates for people getting help, mental health help, if they're feeling suicidal. That he wanted someone to intervene for him, but he didn't have anybody to go to. And he came to a local university near where I live, and I went to go hear him. And he's saving lives. So how do we change this? We get people talking about it. So, that's why relationships matter. Kevin didn't have any relationship. Now he does. He has thousands of people that reach out to him and that have seen the movie. And the movie came out in 2018. I saw it in 2019. In the past,
things about that is shame. There's something about, yeah. Maybe you're going to say that. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I was going there. Yeah. In the past, like our parents' age, or, in 50s, 40s, even before that, when a suicide happened in a community or in a family, it was hidden. It was not talked about. It was filled with shame. There was a moralism to it. I think thankfully now that's changed. And so, people like Kevin Hines, who's producing the movie, he goes around the country and he gives talk. He's on YouTube. He's got a Facebook account, and he describes what he went through, and he has saved lives because he's bringing it out into the open. Shame is, you fear you're going to be judged, right? And some people may judge you, but it's okay now to be able to bring it out to the open, to admit you need help and that you're really not doing well. And Mr. B did do that. He asked for help and he got it, and he survived. So, and I guess what was very important, I think, for Mr. B's treatment is what medical orgone therapy is addressing. In that therapy, it addresses a patient's defense mechanisms and the armoring in their body. So he had this cool, charming facade, and, the pain and the spasms, his jaw clenching, the cool charmer that he was. But medical orgone therapy helped him express that deeper biophysical experience, the emotions, the anger, the sadness, the grief. I mean, orgonomy is the science of how life functions. How did Mr. B function? And that's what medical orgone therapy really looks at, is how someone handles their emotions, what they're feeling, how they're expressing it in their thoughts, in their body, in their emotions. And, Mr. B grew up in a family where he couldn't express himself. For him,
I think there's a certain respect for his limitations you also showed, in terms of he could take charge of something, and it sounded pretty clear that you knew when to challenge him and when to let him be and let his defenses protect him. I mean, there is a rational time that he needs those. And you described how you, whether you addressed it or didn't address it or.
Yeah. Yeah. And he knew I got that.
Yeah.
He knew I wasn't trying to push an agenda or anything. I wanted him to be able to just feel he could express himself. And to survive, he had to suppress all of that. And
I almost wondered he needed those 27 years to get to the point where this could be allowed to happen. I don't know, but
yeah, maybe.
And there's a question from the audience about long-term treatment. Is that something that's necessary for people? I have my thoughts about it, but maybe you could answer that first in terms of.
Yes, absolutely. I would say yes. Someone's thinking like that, there's more to it. And I'd recommend a longer term treatment. To think you end your life. I mean, life is for living, and someone wants to end that because they're in such pain that requires acute addressing of the immediate problem. But what else is under there? And that's what Mr. B and I have been working on the past 6 months. And he's really making a lot of progress and just how he feels about himself, the horseback riding, his family, his work, his friendships, and his family has gotten, I think, stronger because of it, and his sense of his role in his family. And he couldn't express himself as a child, but he can now. He knows he has an outlet in our sessions. Mm-hmm. So long-term treatment, I think that would, to answer the question, it's a good question. I would say yes. Not that short-term can't work, but if someone's feeling like that, there's something deeper going on that I think it would benefit the person. It's like, if you've got an abscess and you're hurting and you just brush your teeth, okay, but you got to go get rid of the infection, get rid of what's underneath of it, and resolve that pain and the source of the pain. He needed to be able to express his love and his anger and his sadness and the frustration and the loneliness. And he did. And then that has really helped him. I can't wait to see where his life goes, now that he's got that freedom. So.
And everybody's different. He had a severe chronic problem that you were helping him with, and different patients have different problems and different severity.
Yeah.
There was a question about, have I experienced suicidal patients? And I have a young man who it might have been 4 months ago or so, started seeing me because he can get depressed and have suicide thoughts. But I saw him just this past week, and he was feeling very down on himself, depressed, like he wasn't doing anything. He wasn't getting anywhere. He has these goals in life, and he wasn't feeling like he was making progress toward those. One thing that I don't think he saw until this last session was to have thoughts of suicide and to be depressed and just to face that and not kill yourself, to just allow yourself to face it and get to the next day. That itself is an accomplishment. And he had no sense of that. He was able to, and he was appreciative to hear that from me, because a lot of people don't understand that, especially someone who hasn't faced that or felt those feelings. To make it through the day, like you described, Mr. B, just to get through the next hour, the next day, is a huge accomplishment. And so for this young man, just to have a sense of, I'm not where I am academically, or not where I am socially, or where am I in my life, but I survived. I got through another day of feeling these intense feelings. That's something to be proud of.
Baby steps, right? The tortoise won the race, not the hare. Small little baby steps. That's like in a metaphor I sometimes use with some of my patients. Just getting through that hour, the next hour, with help. Again, relationships matter. Who are you relating to as you're feeling this intense pain and loneliness or sadness or suicidal thinking? But taking that step and making a phone call, or going to your therapy appointment, taking a walk, riding your horse, whatever works to help you get through that next hour. Your patient, what's his next step, and to help. I think, and that's part of when someone's suicidal, you develop a suicide safety plan. Like, what can you do to keep yourself safe? And if you can't, will you call me? Will you ask for help? And, so just getting someone to think about the next hour, the next day, can slowly get them through deep, deep misery.
Yeah.
Because it'll pass, and you can't see if you're in that bottom of that ditch, you can't see the horizon. You're way deep down underground, and it's very hard to see. So how can you climb up out of it a little bit at a time?
Someone asked, what kind of medication was he on, and what did you do when he was suicidal? Like, what role did that play, or what did you do?
Yeah, he was on an antidepressant and an anti-anxiety medicine. So I raised the dose of both of them, which I think, again, it helped give him a stronger safety net. But it may have contributed to some of his nausea too. The one medicine can cause nausea. So, but it's weighing the risks and benefits of medicine and the dosages. Everybody's different.
But it sounded like, again, he needed both. He needed to have some of it dampened down so it wasn't intolerable, and he needed to express it with you, and you were addressing both ends of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a good question.
There was a question, what did you do to get yourself through this crisis situation with him?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how did you help yourself, is how I hear that.
I like to write. So after I would see him, I would spend a long time writing down what happened in the session, what I experienced, what he was saying, just so I could be clear in my thinking and like, did I miss anything? So I also talked, I have a supervisor that I see and to discuss difficult cases. I talked about it with him, and that was very helpful. Because as therapists, psychiatrists, we can have blind spots, and I didn't want to miss anything with this gentleman because it was so acute. And I have training in suicide prevention, so I had that. I'd been down this road before with other patients. I actually lost a patient to suicide a couple of years ago, but the patient didn't call me. I had no idea. I do suicide risk assessments, and this person didn't. He denied it, and then 6 weeks later, he killed himself. And the family was devastated. I was devastated. So, having the help of a colleague, and I also, in talking with my husband, just telling him he was very supportive, because he knows sometimes, all of us, no matter what work we do, there's stress involved, and we have to take care of ourselves as we take care of others,
I would imagine you needed a place just to express yourself and your feelings.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, because if my own emotional stuff was getting in the way, that would have hurt Mr. B. I needed to be clear and present, and my own fear, I was afraid that he was going to kill himself, but I also trusted him in a way that, and then some patients I have had this experience where I didn't trust them, and then I might hospitalize them. So with him, I didn't have that sense. I knew that he was going to be able to work through it because and I think, again, that's the previous question about long-term relationship. If someone suffers with depression, having someone there that you could go to periodically when things really go awry, that's life-saving in my view. So fortunately, he was able to hang in there all those years. And, as you said, like, he finally, after 27 years, he could express that sweet love and work through some of that pain. There is another angle that I wanted to bring up, if I could, the importance of a family. Mr. B's family was a big part. I didn't go into all the details of it, but they were a very important part of it. That Mr. B's childhood family couldn't handle any emotional stuff. He had as we said, had to hold it in. And, what's the function of a family? And there's, in the Journal of Orgonomy, the ACO has a journal that we publish. In that journal, volume 40, Dr. Peter Christ I'm going to quote it. I want to read this quote so I get it right. Everyone has a family, either as a parent or a child. Families are a universal human social unit. The primary natural function of the family is the expression and discharge of love. A dysfunctional or neurotic family is one in which that expression of love is chronically blocked. Love is the primary organizing principle of the family. So he didn't have that as a kid. Mr. B did not have that. He had it with his aunt and uncle, a little bit with his mom. But with me, he was able to express that. With his wife and his son, he was able to express it. And so despite all the dysfunctional and abusive stuff from his childhood, he still was able to find a way to have emotional contact, And I think him hanging on to his uncle, that memory of his uncle, his mom hugging him and consoling him, that gave him an anchor, to hold on and get through. So he could work for 27 years, so he could express that love and not let it control him where he would end his life. So,
Dr. Marcel, can I ask you to repeat that quote? Because there was just a delay in our connection. I want to make sure that it comes out for the audience to hear.
Yes. Okay. So again, it's from the Journal of Orgonomy, volume 40. It's Dr. Peter Christ. Everyone has a family, either as a parent or a child. Families are a universal human social unit. The primary natural function of the family is an expression and discharge of love. A dysfunctional or neurotic family is one in which the expression of love is chronically blocked. Love is the primary organizing principle of the family.
Mm.
And that's what Mr. B needed. He has that in his family. He has it with me. I think he has it with some of his friends, his concern over his one friend who's not doing so well. I think that was an expression of love. But he was chronically blocked as a kid. He was not a big heart, but in a family that just couldn't hear it or receive it or give it really on the depth that he needed.
Yeah. Dr. Marcel, this has been a wonderful presentation. And we have to stop, but what would you like to say to the audience before we stop?
Well, I would hope that anybody listening, that they're inspired to, help other people heal. If someone is feeling suicidal or if they have a family member or friend who, is depressed and suicidal, that they will make a call to reach out for help. And like Mr. B did. And, as we said in the past, it was shameful to ask for help. Families kept it hidden. And that has really changed. So if anybody's feeling suicidal or having thoughts or they're going to act on it, there's a National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. It's 1-800-273-TALK, TALK. And you can speak to someone 24/7. I actually called them Thursday just to find out how they do what they do. And I talked to one of their staff members. And it's a national, anywhere in the United States. And there are international helplines too. There's also a crisis text line. You can text the word hello, HELLO, to 741-741. And, that will get an individual right in contact with someone that would be willing to get them to help, get them help and just listen. Get them into treatment and keep them safe. So anyone can reach out for help, make that call. That's my hope, that Mr. B's story hopefully will help somebody else and help someone else heal.
Thank you, Dr. Marcel.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Burritt. It's been a pleasure. And thanks to all of our audience and to the staff that help pull this off. We can't do this without their help.
Absolutely.
So thank you.
And to the donors of the ACO who make our work possible, it's much appreciated. How do you feel after listening to Mr. B's story and our discussion? What do you think? I think it's worth restating that a foundation of medical orgone therapy is the therapist's ability to handle the intensity of whatever emotions come up for the patient. Dr. Marcel's ability to tolerate Mr. B's emotions helped Mr. B to tolerate and to express his feelings, giving him relief. The best way to help the ACO spread its knowledge is by letting others know about us. I hope you share this podcast with your friends and family and let them know about our work. You can connect with us at orgonomy.org. I'm Dr. Chris Burritt. Thank you for listening to the A Different Kind of Psychiatry podcast brought to you by the ACO. Since 1968, the psychiatrists affiliated with the American College of Orgonomy have been helping patients discover greater satisfaction, health, and overall well-being in their lives. Whether patients suffer with mental illness, struggle with addiction, or feel unsatisfied with their work lives or relationships, medical orgone therapy as practiced by the physicians at the ACO offers a way forward, often without the use of medication.